I'd like to introduce Pascale Tremblay. Pascale is based here in Seattle. She's a global content strategy consultant who has worked with organizations to enabling their language capabilities and helping them gain a competitive advantage. She was previously the head of language product and localization at Gap Inc. And she now advises and develops global language capability initiatives for growing companies, including language boy, I'm suddenly unable to say this word, operationalization, multilingual language product ecosystem design, process evolution strategy, and she is a technology evangelist. So please join me in welcoming Pascale Tremblay.
Hi, Paula. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here tonight. And I will share my screen right now. Hi, everyone. Here we go. Okay, so are we able to see the screen? So,
yes,
thank you. Sorry. So it's great to be here tonight, and we're going to talk about the future of global success. So my understanding is that, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge how special it is to see people from all over the world for this presentation as we talk about localization, global success, and such. And so it's an exciting topic, and there's lots going on. We have a very short amount of time. There's a lot to cover, and we have a very diverse audience. So we're going to take a high-level overview of localization. And I hope if there's one thing you can take away from this presentation tonight is how inherently language is part of the global content experience, and how the two, with enabling and new technologies and new processes, they're becoming and merging together more and more to create and to merge that language experience. And I love to hear your questions and your feedback at the end. But with further ado, I will start the presentation. So welcome to the future of global success. And a little bit about me. So I am I've been in the localization and language industry for more than 20 years. And I think I'm very deeply connected with the world around me. And also this has been part of my mission, really, to connect language to throughout ecosystem, throughout the organization that I worked. And so it's my goal to really enhance the experiences through meaningful and creative work. And I think in this time of great transformation with my consultancy, I work to bridge the knowledge gap between teams, between function, and to really help create the condition for success. And there's a lot of questions from clients that I see, and it's really the how to pivot the work to really be operationally ready from a language perspective to the technological revolution that we're seeing with AI. The discussion tonight is not going to be focused on AI, but really kind of how to set the pace and the trends we're seeing. And I'd love to work together with leaders, teams, and individuals on shaping the future of the global experience and leveraging language operationalization to implicitly delight customers and users globally. So tonight I will take you to my introduction, really the angle of this presentation. We're going to look at translation versus localization. What is the difference? Why are there two terms? Why does localization matter? How do we make the process work? Leveraging technologies to create a global experience. And the next frontier, the pivot to linguistic data. And so for me, the future of global success is really anchored in accessibility, relevance, and simplicity. And so if we think in terms of language, if we think in terms of content, when we look into those three terms, accessibility, relevance, and simplicity, Each of these terms really pack a lot of information. And accessibility is true for the design of your platform. It's true for content. It's true for very different aspects of the content experience, the user experience, relevance, whether your customer, your users are the United States or in another country, that cultural, emotional relevance is critical. And simplicity. Simplicity is never, it's more is less is more, I should say. So creating simplicity is a really, really important asset, and ever more so in the complex world that we're in. And it takes a lot of work to create simplicity, knowing how putting content together or even putting translation and localization together. So if the future is really finding that balance and really mastering the aspect of the operationalization of language. And so how do we leverage languages and localization to create a meaningful content globally? So let's take a look at what is translation. So in researching through the web with the definition really from Merriam-Webster, also other sources that I've summarized here. Translation historically has been the process of really carrying the meaning across from one experience to the next, really to create a shared narrative, a shared experience. However, today in the business environment, when we think in terms of translation, we really look at the process of translating words or text from one language to another. So historically here, what we can understand from that is that and I said, sorry, let me back up here. When I say in the business environment, if you talk to a translator that does literally translation, it really encompasses the meaning, the interpretation, the feelings, and really transposes it with a lot more context than just a literal translation, as we say, from one language to another. But with business, uh, the meaning of translation has really narrowed, and it's translating word or text from one language to another. And I put here also a change to a different substance, form, or appearances, because there's are also very much a lot of intangibles that we translate within the realm of language or within the realm of localization. So all these definitions really apply. So what is translation versus localization? So because in business, we have narrowed the term translation to really mean text from one language to another, we also needed to create nuances and really to expand for other type of works that we do. So localization was coined maybe a couple decades ago, and it's really the process of adapting a product, a website, or a piece of content to resonate with the target market, to your target customers. And then in this process, there's adaptation of several elements, data formatting, spelling, legal content, etc. Right? So, but in localization, within that umbrella, there is translation. And then if you are part of an organization that has a mature globalization strategy or global strategy, you will also hear the term globalization. And globalization is yet a hierarchy higher than localization. It really encompasses localization and then translation, and it's the holistic approach and strategic approach for a go-to-market and a very intentional way to address your global customers. And within globalization, you also operationalize translation, transcreation, internationalization, and so on and so forth. And so when we adapt content, I'm sure you've heard often, what does that mean to say, what's the difference between translation and transcreation? So transcreation, different than translation, is really the process of translating the intent or the concept. And transcreation is often associated with marketing content or very creative content. Sometimes you just can't put it into you cannot translate because you're using in the source language, which is typically in the US, it's English. And so your source language is using a lot of idiomatic expressions that you just can't translate. It just doesn't have a correspondence in the target language. And so transcreation is very important with creative teams. And this is really about the concept rather than the words. And then internationalization, this is really about translating software strings and creating that process where you can, you have more of a technical aspect and you have automation, and you can really create more of a global user experience through ensuring that the formatting of your strings is appropriate to your target markets. So this is a bit of an overview, high level, of translation versus localization. But if you're new or you're just starting to work with different and global markets, that should help you navigate around those that terminology. But why does localization matter? Well, the obvious, right? As content creator, content strategist, better overall user experience. And so this relates to global market as well. Market penetration. There are some markets where if you do not have a localized product, your user will not be able to relate because they are unable to speak English or they just don't really understand. A famous market for that is Japan. Japanese are well known to really need localization for market penetration and really grasp what you're selling over there. And then increase sales and revenue as you expand globally. Obviously, more customer, more revenue. Your brand reputation. Compliance. So, for example, if you're expanding to Canada, well, if you're selling in all provinces, you have to have a French equivalent for anything that is sent out to the province of Quebec. And this is by law. It's not a choice. It's regulatory compliance, and there's very specific conditions you have to meet there. Then you have a competitive advantage. So if there are some markets, if, for example, if you decide to translate into their local language, you increase your customer reach by 20, 50%, depending on the country you're in. Then customer engagement. So are you trying to engage, at what level are you trying to engage with your customer, and what's your goal for retention? And also global consistency and quality. So global consistency and quality is very critical, but sometimes I put it in the obvious, but this is one of those intangible that it's sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to measure the success of your localization there. And then there's the not so obvious. And I put it in this category because often it's very difficult to make a case to translate or to localize your product. Sometimes because there's budget restraints, sometimes there's not enough resources to create a localization workflow. Sometimes a company just doesn't know where to start. So in the not so obvious category, we have the one thing that I put at first here is the new global user. And if any of you tonight is working on this aspect of the global user, I would love to hear, because with clients and with my previous experience, I haven't seen much on this one. And I say global user because there's definitely a shift in behavior from local users to, they have more of a global awareness. And because there are using applications that are global. And sometimes you're interacting, whether it's through gaming, whether it's through shopping, you're interacting at an international level, even though you're on a local app. And so at times your platform will have automatic translations. And so if you're just reading comment, that's appropriate. Sometimes you have a fully localized application, but there doesn't have much standard. And when you do research, you're trying to find the data to really encompass that user. It's still very difficult to show in numbers. So if you are working on that, I'd love to hear more. And then there's the famous ROI. So if you invest in localization and you expand in languages, the investment at first is a little bit, can be costly. And sometimes it's very difficult to show the ROI. Because from language is embedded in everything. And so if you decide to begin your customer journey and you want to prove your ROI, then is it the marketing campaign that worked? Is it because we offered customer support in Spanish? Like there's so many variables here that sometimes it can be very difficult to prove the ROI for if you want to expand, if you want to add languages. However, the language industry do have a lot of research and studies that have been done, and they can help guide your storytelling here. But I find that having the right numbers or pulling those numbers, it can be tricky. I was, as a personal anecdote, I was gifted with the perfect use case years ago. For example, my leaders had decided to remove one language from the site, and I showed the numbers based on studies, and I said, well, if you're removing that language from the this country, the studies show that you will lose revenue between 20 and 25% because you will reduce your customer reach by that much. And so it was decided to ignore the risk and to bypass the study because they thought in that country, the assumption was really that English was prominent and it shouldn't be a problem. Well, 8 months later, after we had a 22% revenue decrease, and we're talking 7 zeros after the number, then it made a huge impact. So proving the ROI was then that became a really, really good use case to prove an ROI, but it's not always simple. And then productivity, that's another one that sometimes is a little bit more difficult to prove. But if you know where to look, you can help your teams discover how to talk about productivity and localization. And as many companies do have distributed workforce across the globe, and really depending on the type of work that is being done for your company, oftentimes it's kind of intuitive to think, oh yeah, we should translate, but we don't have the numbers. But I think it's important here to look at the socioeconomics of your target audience. And one company that I worked at, there was a very highly technical documentation and for technical a very complex piece of technology that we were installing. And the assumption was, well, in this country, they all speak English, they're very educated and they speak English, so it shouldn't be a problem. But we did see problems because the audience might not have had the level of education that triggers a wide knowledge of English for really complex technical documentation. And the technology was a brand new technology, so there were a lot of new concepts and a lot of new words within those technical documents. So we were able to pinpoint the loss of productivity and how much back and forth there were, and also how people were having a hard time translating, because if you're not a translator, it's hard for you to translate that context in that very technical aspect. So we were able to really dig into why there was a loss of productivity, and it came down to language. There was a lot. So while this, if you know where to look, productivity can be a really good ally, but it's also one of those that it's a little bit more difficult to pinpoint. And then the experience, the intangible. So those are a little bit more difficult to prove why they matter so much. But in our highly connected and very complex world and digital world with social media, various applications, and I'm sure everyone here, feels the burden of so much technology, and that are really sucking time away from other things in your life. The more simple the text that you can provide as a source, and that we can localize and translate, the better it will be. And so that's something that's in the simpler experience for the target customer will really help build loyalty. And then an aspect where I just started to see talked about in terms of content, in terms of an asset for the customer experience, is time saving. Because we are being constantly pulled from one application to another, from one phone calls to another. If the product, if what your content is aiming at, if there is a time-saving element to it, which localization will enable, because it's so much easier for a German speaker, for example, to just read in German. They don't have to start thinking in translating in their head. That's going to be a big plus. I'm not, it's when you do customer surveys, or you wonder that these are not yet, I haven't seen it applied yet in that data research, but I'm seeing and hearing more and more how that's going to be important. And then belonging. So when you think about your customers in other countries, and that you're speaking to them in their language, they really feel a sense of belonging to your brand, to your product. And sometimes in other countries, the fact that you're translating or localizing will really elevate your product. And I've seen products where the localization was so good, and where they had I have one in mind where all the commercial, for example, in the province of Quebec, had been done with local artists. And that was in the early 80s, when localization was just emerging as a discipline. The localization of those commercials was so great that an entire generation, Pepsi had done that. An entire generation in Quebec just doesn't drink Coke, because they have that sense of belonging with the product, and it felt so local, and it felt it was part of the culture. So when you localize and you do it well, it's that part is also very intangible, but you win a lot of, you win on the emotional level. But so these aspirations are great to enable that global customer experience and to make it better. But in reality, how do we make it work? And working with so many various teams, as the head of language product and localization at Gap, we had 4 global brands and also global offices. So how do we make it all work all together? Because it's a complex matrix. It's a fashion retail is a very highly reactive, and So when you talk to content teams, and especially when it comes to marketing and product information, product catalog, those go through really, really quickly, and the websites are always updated. And it can be quite the burden to operationalize that and to localize, because there's never enough time. And so what we did at the Gap was really to shift the mindset. And this has also proven to be extremely useful for other teams and other clients. It's about shifting the mindset and looking at localization not as a translation partner, but a global enablement resource, a team that can really help you expand. And we've seen that in leveraging technologies, not only are you expanding your reach from a content perspective because you're localizing and you're going into different market, but because you have to transform and create more efficiencies, we have seen that it was also beneficial for the content teams to develop certain processes and automation overall, because of you have to think about language, you have to think about imagery, that really helped everybody overall. So leveraging technologies to create a global experience. So here, a finely tuned content ecosystem that include workflow automation via language technologies can really improve the creator and designer experiences. So for those of you who are working in a mature environment, or I should say a mature digital environment, I'm sure you have experienced a translation management system connected to your CMS. And that process is really, really enabling growth, creative expansion, and also eliminate the redundant task and unnecessary task of translation and localization. For those of you who might not be working with a CMS or a translation team or localization team within your organization that has a translation management system, when I talk about redundant and unnecessary task, is that for prepping an email to request and a translation or a localization of a product, and really that manual aspect of file, that I sympathize with you, because it takes a long time. It's really unfun, and it's daunting. There is a better way, and technology can really help. And while sometimes, and I've seen it with some teams, there is a bit of a resistance about the creative process, and not to eliminate that, it's important to work with the localization team to ensure that the creative process is safe and sound. It's very important. This is really part of the brand, the voice, and the tone, but it can really help create efficiency. So when you look at working and leveraging technology with your localization teams, there are three key principles that are very important: simplicity, interoperability, and partnership. So these are guiding principles that I use to create a localization ecosystem, but also principles that I use to work with key stakeholders. So simplicity. So when, depending on the type of ecosystem that you work with, simplicity is critical, because from a language perspective, there are a lot of steps that happens when you go through localization. And so working within an environment, an ecosystem that is simple at the core, will enable more fluidity when you have to work with your localization process. When, for example, content is being localized, for example, oftentimes my stakeholders would say, oh, we know it's going to this black box, but we really don't know what's happening there. So depending on your type of content, there could be 5 steps, you know. So if you're in a mature environment, there is machine translation, post editing, there's QA. Then if it's in design file for your output, if it's in your CMS, there are like 5 to 10 steps sometimes. So the simplest your workflows, the better it will be for everyone. The second key principle, interoperability. So this really applies to technologies. And so when you work as a content strategist and you look at different tools to use to create your content, I personally recommend to really work with your stakeholders in the localization team, the globalization team, to really discuss what type of tools you're looking at. Because as we've seen, tools evolve, ecosystem evolve. And so if you have a technology that can be easily connected with another one, it's going to be a win-win situation. Otherwise, you need to do customization and you need to create, and it's a little bit more daunting to create those automated workflow. And then that also goes back to the simplicity where if you have a tool that is at the core very, very fluid to be connected with other technologies, then it's a lot easier to grow and to evolve with that tool. And then the third part is partnership. Here, partnership is critical with your stakeholders internally and your technology vendors, because technology, again, evolves. And so if you need to do, well, most organizations will need to do some sort of customization. There's no one ecosystem that is that's just going to work with off-the-shelf technology. So creating a partnership with the stakeholders and the partners, and also with your technology vendor, and ensuring that you're choosing a technology vendor that can help you grow internally and provide you the support you need to really tailor your ecosystem, are very important. And so and then if you go through with those key principles, you can really create a streamlined partnership and collaboration with localization. And then within this ecosystem, then you can also have the content flow much more easily. And so this is really a high level. There's a lot more into these 3 principles, and I'm happy to take questions on that. But really at the base, it's very important to think about that. Because when you create your ecosystem and your workflows with your localization teams and business partners, what the goal is really to create mutually beneficial processes and automation. And so when you think about localization and you think about a team and a resource of global enablement, you can really open up more channels for you. And so when you look at localization as a partner to help you operationalize language, you can do a lot more. And so, for example, you really need to create a holistic ecosystem here. So, for example, the blueprint design for your system should really be cross-functional collaboration, because languages are embedded in everything. And as we see with new technologies and generative AI, the language components of each tool is embedded And so creating consistency across your messaging is becoming more and more complex. So as you add your ecosystem and you see localization as your global enablement team, then, or as a component of your global enablement team, you can deploy content much more easily. And then in working with that ecosystem too, you can optimize your format and really internationalize your format. You are also simplifying some of your workflows, and it really helps for the clarity of purpose for all the teams that are involved in creating the content. So this is how you can create a working arrangement, a working collaborations with your localization team. What I've seen is a lot more involvement upstream. So instead of just submitting your content for translation or for localization, I've seen now a lot more collaboration as kickoff, as when the content and the concept are also being designed. And that is when you build your ecosystem and you start working upstream with your localization team, that's very beneficial, because oftentimes if you're building a platform, if you're building a website, if you start with the source and then you think in terms of localization and globalization, then you will run into some challenges. You will run into some challenges for checkout is an obvious one. Language, the field for your language, the nav bar, and so on and so forth. It's you're going to run into those issues really easily if you have not partnered with your localization team ahead of really launching your product. And then when we think about our global user and our global customers and the simplicity with which they go from one app to the next, what I see in the future is really thinking in terms of a global experience and having different markets, and the US being one of those markets, so that it's a lot more streamlined to expand than to start with one source and then localize, because that process is actually a little bit counterintuitive and creates a lot more pain points along the way than if you start from inception. So now what's next for localization? And as I started talking about what I see in terms of a global experience, and this is what I see for what's next in localization. There's a paradigm shift, and we're really headed into a language experiential component. And so with, as I just mentioned, when we start with the source, and whether it's a website, whether it's customer support, whether it's marketing, creating from one version of content and then adapting it for another market, and working with the limitation of each asset or for the framework of your or the UI or whatnot, it can be very difficult. So how do we start looking at the global experience when it comes to language, and how do we operationalize all of that? And so what we are seeing today is that language is really becoming linguistic data. And what does that mean, right? And so as the complexities of our ecosystem continues to develop, and it becomes more about, and we're integrating generative AI into the process of creating drafts or a really important discussion that's happening in the language industry is that where are we going to find efficiency with generative AI? We are highly aware that generative AI is not perfect, and there's a lot of mishap when the output comes out. And you've seen it in English, and as localization professional, we see it across in various languages. And also, not all languages are properly trained in the large language models, or they've been properly created with the right data. So there's a lot to unpack there. And so where can we really start operationalization and really look at? So I think here, in order to make that shift, there's going to be a bigger merger between content and localization, because content and language is really um, an experiential layer of content. And what does that mean for English? Because English needs to be operationalized. And I'm saying English, it could be another language, but English is usually the source. And so what does that mean? And how do we operationalize that? And I think working together with content and localization more closely, localization can bring the knowledge of operationalization of language and also create a language experience, including the source language. And when you operationalize that, how does that look? You can start using linguistic data that includes the source language, and then you can operationalize it with you can get an output maybe from generative AI, where at least this is what clients, this is what peers in this industry are trying to unlock right now. And so you bypassed the first and complex step of localization, where you had the source, you translate the source, then you adapt, or you adapt and you try. So you're eliminating that redundancy and you translate directly from the concept. And then what does that look like? Then you put the human in the loop so that you can have content creator, content expert, and terminologists, and so on and so forth. So that's what the language industry is really trying to unlock at this time. And seeing how ecosystems have evolved recently in the last few years, and the big progress we have made also with machine translation. We shouldn't forget that one. It really points out to a merger of the content experience and language as one of its layer. Oops. I wanted to go here. So the future of global success, it's really addressing the global experience. And while not everyone is at the same stage in terms of thinking about that global user, we see it in how to become more and more efficient. And in a very hyper-connected environment, the merger of content layers and operational as in a systemic workflow will be key to ensuring global success. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Merci. And I'd be happy to take some questions.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you, Pascale. That was fantastic and so much information there. We did have a couple questions come in on chat. The first one from Christine, referring back to your slide about why localization matters. Christine was calling out the not so obvious user being the new global user. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about the new global user and maybe some concrete examples of who that might be.
Well, like I said, this is something that is just surging or emerging right now, because one of the aspects from a content creator, from a language professional, that is not talked enough and there's a lot of uncertainties. There's a lot of resistance with the technology. However, one of the benefits of AI is that it's normalizing translation across the board. And whether we like it or not, the content, is it good, is it bad? It's rendering localization available everywhere. Because if you go on Facebook, Instagram, there's always that little, oh, translate the comments, translate this, translate that. Well, you can't do that across the board for all application. However, what we're seeing is that, oh, well, customers are expecting a global experience. They are expecting content in all languages all at once simultaneously. And so there's also the rise of accessibility, inclusivity. So we haven't even touched about that topic tonight. And so this is all part of that accessibility. And we're seeing just the emergence. So language accessibility linked with other accessibility components of your user experience are becoming intrinsic part of that global user experience. And I'm sure you guys have seen also from Zoom, for example, they had to pivot really, really quickly and create all those captions, those direct translation. In my previous role, when we had the chance to work directly with Zoom because we were a big customer, you know, the first iterations, it was very clunky, but they had to pivot and really get great first because that was the rise of the customer expectation. We need great caption. And if you're providing caption in French and Japanese, it needs to be worthwhile. Otherwise, you know, my customer experience or my employee experience is not going to be great. And so while we don't have the number, the expectations are changing. And from that perspective, there is that global experience that is becoming more and more expected from the user.
Pascale, just a quick interruption. You might want to just stop screen sharing since you closed your slides. We're just seeing your desktop there. So
yes.
Sorry, back to you, Tony, for questions. There we go.
Excellent. Yeah, and thank you everybody for the questions that have come in. If you do have questions and you haven't entered them already, just drop them in the chat, and we'll talk to Pascale about them as well. Next question came from Leaf, and it's a common one. All this sounds fantastic: translation, management databases, etc. But when push comes to shove, often product teams might backlog these features or backlog these tools and tool sets. Curious, Pascale, if you've had success stories or heard of success stories where a product team or company has taken the leap to invest in operations to support localization. You gave the rationalization, but curious if you have any examples of companies that have done that or anything you've seen yourself.
Can you clarify your question? Like, so do you mean because do you mean it's as a grassroots within an enterprise? Is that the angle where you're looking? We're seeing the need, but we don't have the tools, and we're trying to build a business case. Is that? Am I understanding it correctly?
Yeah, I think the nature of the question was, how do you build the business case for it? How do you get operational product improvement off of a backlog?
Well, so it really depends on the context and what's your product and what is the goal, what are the goals of the company, right? And then so if you are, for example, if you're in Canada, well, it's a legal requirement, so you have to start building your case based on the language requirements. And if you're not, if you're in Canada and you're not translating, your company is subject to fines and other things. If you are in Europe, if you are going to Asia, it's really about building the business case. And then you look at your customer journey, and then you really start looking at the steps of your customer journey. What are the pain points? And really start telling the story of your customer, the customer need, the competitive advantage that you might get. But each company is really, like I said, it's very tricky because you need to align with the goals of the company. So if your company's goal is to expand globally, then you have to have a go-to-market strategy, and it's very important to work with your product owner on that piece. And sometimes you can't have it all. But what is your go-to market strategy? Are you going to go by tiers? And what are, sometimes it's you have to start somewhere, and then you have to understand your go-to market, and then from there you build on that experience. It's you have to put it together as building blocks.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Thank you. Next question came from Liz. You talked about translation, management databases, TMSs. What are the benefits, the top maybe 3 to 5 benefits of investing in a TMS? And how would you recommend, any advice you might have for communicating that to a leadership team?
So with content, talking with you guys, being content expert, I'm sure you have seen in your career, there's never a drop in volume of content that you create, but it's always exponential, right? And so when you start adding translations to the mix, then if you have 2, 3, 4, 5 languages, you go 5 times exponentially in terms of volumes. And then so if you do not have a translation management system, you incur greater cost. And so there are 2 schools on that. So it really depends. Like some companies are small and they decide to outsource everything. However, the more mature and the more complex your internal ecosystem, you really want to manage your localization process and your translation management system in-house for greater savings in terms of cost. Because initially, one of the common perception for localization, it's perceived as a cost center. But actually, it should be perceived as an investment to create the condition for success. So initially, when you build your business case to get a translation management system, you have to look at it from a long-term investment. And so the initial cost might look a little bit higher, but if your company decides to go, so the first year is 5 countries, and then the next 3 years, you're going to go into 50 countries, then each time you add a country, you lower your cost of your technology. And then when you first start implementing your technology and you're not outsourcing everything, but you start managing in-house, we have seen cost saving and cost benefit by more than 40% across the board. So depending on the technology you choose, depending on your ecosystem, typically when you start looking and opening your RFPs, you can really look at the benefits with your vendors, and they can really highlight some of those cost benefits. But over what I've seen over time is a real cost saving. I mean, 40%. And with new technologies right now, that you have machine translation that is better than ever. You have adaptive generative Gen AI. You have other quality estimation and so on that are available for languages. The cost is just getting much more efficient. And it's not that you will need less people, but you can do a lot more with the same budget. And so this is really a very strong selling point.
Excellent. Thank you. And this is another kind of related question from Christine. You talked a bit about companies that have brought their translation services in-house. Wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the types of businesses that are using vendors and technology partners to help them localize their content, particularly in bulk. Is there a particular size or type of business that you've seen that is most common in that particular area?
It's really an individual choice by the organization. I think there is pros and cons for each of these solutions, right? The one thing though with translation management system, this is not something that you can outsource per se. You because it's a SaaS and it's not about outsourcing it, but if you work with a language service provider, they usually have their own internal tools and they will give you access. However, you have a little bit less control over the output of your content because it's managed completely externally. So you rely entirely on your vendor to communicate your brand, your product in global markets. And then, but then if you go in the internal route, it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to build a business case because you do need people to manage that process. And so it really depends what are the goals of the company and what are we trying to achieve, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I guess this is skipping ahead a bit to a question from Diana, which I think also talks a little bit about this. There are plenty of localization solutions and platforms out there. If you're looking at one right now, how do you decide which one to use? What are some of the factors you should be considering, regardless of company reputation? But when you're looking at what your company needs, what are some things that you might want to put together of here are the top tenets we might have for that?
Yeah, so the devil is in the details, but it's a great question. Thank you. There in the RFP process, first of all, I recommend to look at different solutions, but depending on the type of localization model you are building within your organization, you should have at least your top 10 priorities. Are you building a self-serve model for your business partners? And if so, you need to bring in your stakeholders to get their point of view on, is it going to be a difficult platform to use? So if they want to submit this type of content, and also what type of content are you processing? Are you more a creative company processing marketing or e-commerce? Or are you a technical product producing technical documentation, software strings, and so on and so forth? So depending on what you're producing, the type of localization model you're trying to build within your organization, there's going to be different solutions. There are solutions where you can use a technology and you can push through everything, and it's kind of a one-stop shop. And there are other technologies where it's more of a platform, and you can connect multiple other technologies to create really multiple type of workflows. So again, here it might be important to work with a professional to help you determine what those priorities are and what is out there and what will best suit your needs. Because as you said, there are a lot of options. So it's really about choosing the right one for your organization.
And just a quick follow-up on that too. Say you have a superior who says, well, why do I need a vendor for this? We have Google Translate and I have my phone and it looks just fine. What would you suggest in terms of combating that approach, which I know from real world experience actually exists?
Oh yeah, it happens. It's one of the biggest challenge, and now the biggest challenge is generative AI. It's embedded in every tool that are being added to the tech stack within an organization. So I think as if you're a content strategist and you're trying to push to get localization and really, so I think when your leaders can relate to how Google Translate or how generative AI, when you can show the output for English, for example, they can understand, or you can reverse translate on Google and they'll understand how clunky that sounds. And then also it's super unsafe, like your data is not safe on those sites, right? But at the end of the day, it's about, okay, do you care about your brand image? And within each brand, within each product, there's so much curation of the content, and how do you translate that, right? And one of the the thing that I see that's going to be more and more important for localization and content strategy is really to come together to operationalize that, because today copywriters and creators in the source language, and we usually say English, they are facing the same challenges that translators have faced for the last 20, 30 years, like trying to prove the case, right? And not only that, how do you operationalize language within the generative AI ecosystem? Because you're going to have to break it down so that you can integrate. And whether we like it or not, this is something that's being pushed across the board. So how do you make the best of it? And content and creators and localization professionals needs to partner on this one, because each of these segments are bringing something very highly specialized. And where I see localization professional being really helpful for content strategy is the ability to operationalize language, to see it in a fragmented way so that you can put it together and really create that language experience that you were used to before all that technology came through.
Excellent. And thank you for addressing the Google Translate question as well. It sounds like other people have heard it too, so I might not be the only one. Last question, unless there are others in the chat, comes from Elise. And it's kind of similar to what you're just talking about. Gen AI, linguistic data, what is it? What are examples of it? Is it just variable, different characteristics about a specific language? Is it something else? And curious where you potentially might see it heading.
So generative AI is definitely will be part of the ecosystem. That is no that's a no-brainer. Like everyone in our industry is really trying to unlock how to deploy it. Some big companies that have big budget to invest right now are using it, not only in English but also in other languages. But it's really it's not quite ready yet to be scalable. And so they're really working at scaling it. And then, but the way we're looking at it is that um, language itself will be transforming into linguistic data. And so you have to train your models. You have to provide the customization of your internal and cultural environment. So you have to work with that linguistic data set or those data sets, and then train your models so that you can get better outputs. And then, but once you have these outputs, then you have to have people in various language validate not only the language quality, but also now the content. So you're creating different job opportunities, actually, because we went from translators to linguists to post-editing linguists, and more specialized. Now we're opening another universe for language, and so all these other specialization are really going to surface. And this is happening for target languages, but that's going to happen for the source language as well.
Great, thank you. It seems like there's not there are no conversations about content strategy and technology these days that aren't going to end with someone saying, what about AI and how is this going to change our world? So definitely you can, I think we'll all expect to see things happening in this field as well. With that, I think I'm going to say thank you, Pascale. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Reminder that our event next month is not an online event, so sorry to the folks in Australia and all over the country that we won't be seeing next month. But if you are local, we would love to see you in person. Watch the meetup site and our Slack channel and LinkedIn and all those places I mentioned before for details about that. We'll have basically kind of a just happy hour, meet and greet, mingle. We're going to have an informal panel with a few content strategy folks, including Ahala Liebtag and Erica Jordan and our own Tony Septiak, who's been our question moderator tonight. So we'd love to see you there, and then join us again in August when we're back online with a session on knowledge graphs with Deborah Carver. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening.